My kids were still excited. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the annual Lake Whatcom Cooperative Management Program's annual joint meeting. Well, I've gotten the light on this. How are we doing? Can everyone hear me now? Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is the annual meeting of the Joint Councils and Commissions for Lake Whatcom. I'm going to call to order the Bellingham City Council. My colleagues will call to order their meeting, and then we'll do a roll call. So I hereby call to order the meeting of the Bellingham City Council.
Call to order meeting of Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District.
And I would call to order the Whatcom County Council.
Roll call, please.
John Carter. Here. Curtis Casey.
Here.
Bruce Ford.
Here.
Todd Citron.
Yeah.
Laura Wyde. Here. Todd Donovan.
Here.
Carl Weimer.
Here.
Red Brown. Barbara Brenner. Here. Ken Mann. Satpal Sidhu.
Here.
Barry Buchanan.
Here.
Dan Hamill.
Here.
Michael Lillquist.
Here.
Jean Knutson. Roxanne Murphy.
Here.
Pinky Vargas.
Here.
Terry Borneman.
Here.
April Barker.
Here.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder to the people, when you speak, please turn your microphone on. The red light will appear. Some of you will have to share your microphones. And we'll go ahead and start the meeting. Our opening comments this evening will be by the County Executive, Jack Lowes, and Patrick Sorensen, the General Manager of Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District. Jack, would you like to go first?
Well, good evening, councils, commissioners, and citizens. Good to have you all here again this year. Before I start, I'd like to extend the regrets of the mayor. She has some family issues that she's dealing with that are quite serious, and our thoughts should be with her and her family. And she asked that I speak both on her behalf and on behalf of the county tonight. So I've got kind of a combined remarks. And Patrick, it's good to always be with you and with the Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District. Of course, we appreciate the work that you're doing out at Lake Whatcom also. So our joint administrations with your leadership, and by your leadership I mean the leadership of the commissioners of the Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District, the Whatcom County Council, and the Bellingham Council, are delivering a comprehensive solution in a collaborative way as called out on the 5-year plan that the councils and the commission in April of 2015 adopted. We're continuing a legacy of water quality improvements that go back to 1992. And has, since the early years, been driven by a strong sense of community. The strength of our collaboration continued to be demonstrated in 2016, and I'm happy to report on that tonight. 3 great examples that we have are that the Homeowners Incentive Program, which the city piloted, and with the county and the Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District support, conducted comprehensive market research to increase the effectiveness of that program and for the Lake Whatcom watershed residents. The county is now assuming an enhanced role as the focus turns to the unincorporated portions of the basin, and I'm pleased to report that. Also, we've fully integrated the Aquatic Invasive Species Program in Lakes Whatcom and Samish that aims at maximizing the number and value of boat owner contacts. We have some serious challenges out there, and we have this preventive program, and I'm pleased to say that it's going quite well. Finally, we're coordinating stormwater capital planning projects with capture zones that span jurisdictional boundaries, and I think that that's real important for us to take a real collaborative approach in finding solutions to this. And I'd like to thank the administrations of all 3 of the agencies for working together to implement the plan and to implement strategies that work on all of our behalf. One important development in 2016 was the delivery of the long-awaited total maximum daily loads by the Department of Ecology. A status report about where we are in meeting those loading targets will be presented later in the evening. And I'm looking forward to hearing where we're at on that, because I don't know. And now we're starting our 3rd year under the current implementation plan. Last year's phosphorus reduction projects were completed in the Cedar Hills, Euclid area, and retrofits of stormwater systems in the East North and the East Oregon Street areas are now designed. In 2017, projects will include the construction of the retrofits noted previously, also a new facility in Agate Bay, and design work for improvements in Sudden Valley. Additionally, an update of the county's Lake Whatcom Comprehensive Stormwater Plan for the unincorporated portion of the basin will be finished that will lay out the next decade of high-value watershed improvements. In sum, these capital projects add up to meaningful steps towards meeting our community's phosphorus reduction goals. Furthermore, the county continues to work to secure funding to meet our commitments in Lake Whatcom watershed for the future, as is the City of Bellingham and as is the Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District. That concludes my report tonight, and I'd ask Patrick if you'd like to come up.
Hopefully you can see me here. It's been a long day, so I decided to roll in instead of walk in. It's really an honor to be here and to represent the commissioners of the Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District as a general manager. You know, the district has been around since about 1968. I think it was created 67, 68. And the primary reason the old, as it used to be called, Lake Whatcom Water District 10, and now it's Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District, was created was to clean up Lake Whatcom, to bring a better assemblage of sewage treatment and collection for the lake. And that was the primary reason, as many of these water and sewer districts have been created. We've been continuing to do that since then, and we are grateful for the opportunity to work with both the city and the county in this effort. Right now, beyond just our financial contribution with our two bigger partners, involves the millions of dollars that the district is investing still and will over the next number of years in regards to upgrading a series of the sewer pump stations that we have to have in order to bring the wastewater out of the basin and into the city for treatment. And it involves significant resources, and we're grateful and happy to do that, because we know also on the flip side, we draw our water for our residents up there in the unincorporated county around the lake from that lake. And we have a significant investment in protecting the lake and ensuring that the wastewater is collected properly and treated and preventing spills into the lake. We've made that significant investment. As for the other activities and the other programs that the county and that the city have implemented, the phosphorus reduction, the plan that was, again, the 5-year plan that was initiated back in April, I think, of 2015, we're thankful and grateful. We've seen so much going forward with that. We want to continue that effort, because without that effort, if we're not working together, we're working against each other, and we know that's not the interest of everybody here and our residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Jack, for your opening comments. We're going to have three main content areas tonight. The first will be a presentation on the Lake Whatcom Monitoring Program annual report. Then we'll hear about the process and the update on the total maximum daily load study and requirements. Then we'll have a presentation on several different management programs and progress and activities for 2016 and 2017. And then we'll end the evening with a public comment period. So if you could make notes, maybe you'll have a comment at the end of it. I'd like to begin by introducing Dr. Robin Matthews, who has been responsible for the scientific monitoring of Lake Whatcom for many years now, and she's here to give an annual report.
While we're waiting for the program to come up, it's a pleasure to be here. I have 30 minutes, which is always challenging. It's hard for faculty to say their name in 30 minutes, so I'll try and keep it moving. I made some decisions about skipping things that I often cover because this group is pretty well informed. If I go too quickly over any particular area, I'd be glad to answer it via email or in follow-up if we have time for questions.
Dr. Mathers, will there be a chance for questions at the end, or do you want us to interrupt you? I think I'd rather wait to the end of your talk.
I can try and leave some time at the end.
If you would leave a little bit of talk to the end.
Would that work better?
Please.
Just so that I can get through the main points, and I'll try and make sure that I don't take too much time. Okay, so this is the annual report. This is what I'm trying to summarize in 25 minutes or less. It's a huge project. And I'm going to focus just on the things that are particularly relevant to the phosphorus reduction and the issues related to water quality in Lake Whatcom. There's a lot of other things that we measure on this project that relate more to drinking water treatment and so on, but I'm going to focus on just a few things. As a reminder, Lake Whatcom is actually composed of a bunch of lakes, all joined together across the surface. Basin 1 and 2 are very small, very shallow. That's where we tend to see the most rapid, we at first saw the rapid changes in the lake. Basin 3, which is 96% of the lake, is a large deep basin, and we have 2 sites located there. Our monitoring sites are located in the approximate deepest location of each of these major subbasins. And we'll be going out second week in April to collect our next set of samples. The objectives that we've had pretty much since I've been involved with this, which is 1986, the objectives have been to collect long-term lake and stream data with an emphasis on the lake. We're also doing quite a bit more storm event monitoring now because of the TMDL and because of the interest in looking at phosphorus mitigation. We have collected from a number of sites. We also are doing some monthly grabs from tributaries, and we've got a couple of the stream hydrographs that we monitor in Austin and Smith Creeks. The other sites are monitored by USGS. We measure, as I said, quite a few different kinds of water quality parameters, and the Institute for Watershed Studies, which I direct, is a state-certified water quality testing lab for these parameters. So it's great because it provides this wonderful cooperation between the community and the students at Western and the staff in Watershed, where they get experience, but we also produce data that meets the state standard for certified information. We collect a number of things at the lake only. We collect a number of parameters in the tributaries only. The ones that I'm going to focus on will be dissolved oxygen, temperature, chlorophyll, and some of the nutrients. So again, as a very quick reminder for people who are familiar with this, water quality in the lake is predictable based on temperature and oxygen. If you show someone who studies lakes the temperature profile and the oxygen profile, they can predict almost everything else that is a water quality parameter from that. During the winter, the lake will be mixing throughout the water column from the surface to the bottom. And so we see profiles that look like this. This is Site 1. It's about 20 meters or 60 feet deep. And those little points, the blue diamonds and the red dots, are actual measurements that show almost uniform temperature and oxygen, cold temperature and fairly high oxygen, from the surface to the bottom. During this time, anything that's dissolved in the water will be mixing from the top to the bottom. But in the summer, the lake stratifies into a surface layer that is warm and usually fairly high in oxygen because it's in contact with the air, with the atmosphere. So that portion is mixing and the oxygen will be moving back in. And then a bottom part of the lake that at Site 1 has almost no oxygen by July. And the reason it has almost no oxygen by July is that that portion of the lake cannot mix with the top, so it can't get any new oxygen, and it has enough organic matter in it that the bacteria that break down this organic matter use up all the oxygen. And once that's used up, there's no new source of oxygen until the lake turns over again in the fall, which for this site will usually be in October, and for the deeper sites in Basin 3 is usually November, December, sometimes even January. The problem that was first documented kind of informally in the annual reports and more formally by Department of Ecology was that the rate of the hypolimnionic oxygen loss, okay, I need to go back to my terms. The hypolimnion is just a scientific fancy name for saying the bottom of the lake. Okay. The rate of oxygen loss at the bottom of the lake has been accelerating. If you start the stratification in about April, May, somewhere in there, you still have a lot of oxygen, even though the lake is temperature-wise, it's stratified. As the bacteria start to use up the oxygen at the bottom of the lake, you see profiles like this, where it moves. And you can see June is a little lower, July is lower yet, and by August and September, there's basically no oxygen at the bottom of the lake. That is not surprising, but what was surprising to me was that the rate at which it was going down was increasing. And if you look, for example, at 14 meters deep, what we were seeing over time was this, which is a very messy curve because it's real data, but basically there is a highly significant increase in oxygen loss at 14 meters that is related to time. So basically what's happening is now in August, when I go down to 14 meters at Site 1, there's no oxygen. Whereas when I first started looking at the lake, there would usually be at least 2 or 3 or 4 milligrams of oxygen still left by August. It will stop. It's sort of tempering out because once you get to 0, you can't go down anymore. So even though the curve is kind of it looks like it's sloping, we're actually pretty flat now because by August we're at 0. One of the new things that's added to this year's report, and if you were in last year's meeting, I talked about this a little bit, we're starting to show the data relative to historic trends. And this was a contribution by Jeff Matthews, who does all the fancy computer science stuff on this project. He took the 1988 to 2014 data set and created smooth polygons showing historic data, and then we superimposed the current year to show where we are this year. And so we can tell whether we've got a warm year or low oxygen just by looking at where the current values fall within these polygons. And I used it last year to show that 2015 was a very, very unusual year. We had all sorts of odd things happening. And that was in last year's presentation. If you look at them this year, you'll see that we do have a fairly warm lake in terms of Basin 3. You can see the site. Does this have a pointer? Here we go. Here's Site 3 and Site 4. Those are the south end of the lake where it's very deep. And you can see that the blue temperature lines are kind of at the upper warm limit. And that means the oxygen's going to be a little bit lower. But you can also see that Basin 1 is within the typical range. And I include these for all of the months that we monitor so you can watch for a particular year how we're going. For example, in May 2016, I could see that the oxygen had already started to drop very, very fast at Site 1. That's this right here. And by June, it sort of caught up at Site 1, but we're still outside the classic pattern. So you can also see when it turns over. I don't want to spend too much time on those because I want to get through some of the other relevant points. The so what is probably not necessary to repeat, but there are a number of reasons why low oxygen is a serious problem in the lake. Relevant to this presentation is that low oxygen at the bottom of the lake will release more phosphorus. When you work with a lake and look at the phosphorus budget, you have two main sources for more phosphorus. One is internal, the other is external. All of your stormwater, that's working on the external. The internal is when the oxygen drops too low that the phosphorus can actually release from the sediments. It's pretty hard to treat in a lake the size of Lake Whatcom, but the good news is that if you work on external loading, you will help the internal loading as well. And as you might expect, since we are seeing both external loading and internal loading, the chlorophyll, the algae levels in the lake are showing the same trend. So as the lake is losing oxygen faster, it's gaining phosphorus both internally and also from the stormwater coming in. The prediction is that that would mean we have more algae in the lake using up. The plants are using up, have more food to grow. And indeed, we see that there is a significant rate of increase for the chlorophyll in the lake. And the chlorophyll is just one way of measuring algae. We see that is at every site, but in particular, it's very dramatic in Basin 3, because Basin 3 started with less phosphorus. Basin 1 and 2 were both already kind of a little more nutrient enriched. Basin 3 was not. When I first started looking at it, it had very low phosphorus levels. So when you add a little bit of phosphorus to a lake that has very little phosphorus, you see a rapid increase, and that's what we're seeing. One of the indicators that the city is using for tracking whether the lake is starting to show recovery is phosphorus at Site 3, and this is what it looks like up through 2016. So you see we're still well outside the range that was established prior to 2000 and had a pretty big bump in 2016. There are direct implications of increased algae in the lake. Many of them are ecological, but the direct pocketbook implication is that it costs more to treat your water. I'm sure that there'll be more discussion about that, but it creates disinfection byproducts, it causes taste and odor problems, and it causes problems with filtration. The external phosphorus loading is something I wanted to mention because I don't usually talk about it very much, but it is a fairly important, fairly significant part of your TMDL, is to try to estimate how much phosphorus is coming in to the lake and reduce it. So one of the things that Watershed does, and we hate this, but we do it anyway, we sample during storms. And storms, there's something statistical about it. They always start in the middle of the night on a Friday, usually when it's like just barely above freezing. But we measure a minimum of 7 samples. The storm has to trigger at least 1 centimeter in 24-hour to be called what's called a qualifying event. It has to be at least 1 centimeter in 24 hours. We've collected a large number of these storm events, and they basically look like this. This is the stage platform of our sampler. It's called an ISCO sampler, and it basically moves up and down as the water in the stream moves up and down. And you can see it going up. This is called the rising leg, or the rising portion of the hydrograph. It's raining hard. The stream is carrying more water. And then it stops raining, ideally. Never happens, but ideally. This was a perfect one. I had to pick hard. This was not what most of them look like. Most of them go bump, 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 bump. But the falling leg of the hydrograph. And we're supposed to collect a minimum of 7 samples, including both the rising leg and the falling leg of the hydrograph. So here's what a typical total suspended solids samples, the little points are discrete samples that we've collected. And we generally collect a lot more than 7. 7 is a minimum, but the modelers say the more data, the better. So we try to make sure we collect more than that. And you can see that basically when it rains, when it rains hard and you have increased runoff in the stream, the amount of sediment in that stream goes up. That's not too surprising. And if you look both total suspended solids, that's just the cloudiness, the particles in the water, total phosphorus follows a very similar pattern. It goes up. And that's the reason why you're working so hard to try to reduce the amount of water that flows directly from the watershed into streams without passing through any kind of treatment. Natural treatment would include moving through the soil. Most surface water, precipitation, when it falls in a forest, soaks into the soil. And that's natural treatment because the trees get it first. They want the phosphorus as much as the algae in the lake, and so they take it first, and the other vegetation. But if the water can move across the land, across the street or whatever, impervious surface, and flow into a stream, it can make it out into the lake. We also measure, so we're required to measure total suspended solids and total phosphorus. We also, because we have a nifty machine that pairs up soluble things with it, so for no extra cost, we throw in soluble reactive phosphate and also nitrate and ammonium. They're interesting to look at because soluble phosphate is the form of phosphorus that is generally considered to be available to plants. And in a storm, it tends to be kind of flat. But this is one of my grad students. He defended in 2015. Algae really want the phosphorus, and there's not a whole lot of soluble phosphorus in runoff because everything else will grab it first. Algae leak enzymes into the water that pull phosphorus off of particles. This contraption has storm water on this side, phosphorus-starved algae on this side, a membrane in between that won't let the algae across, but will let their enzymes across. So these guys are leaking the enzymes that go over here, and this is it's either Anderson, Smith, or Austin. Those were the places we sampled. So that's actual storm runoff from the previous 2014. And the enzymes go in there, they pull the phosphorus off of the tiny little, almost invisible particles, feed themselves, and grow. We also measure nitrate and other kinds. Nitrate is interesting because it actually gets diluted. So when it rains hard, it's dissolved. And if it rains a lot, it'll either be flat or occasionally go up or go down. So it's really hard to say anything meaningful about nitrate at all. Okay, so where are we now? Hypolimnetic oxygen levels are still very low at Site 1. And in 2015 and 2016, we had the two lowest oxygen years in my record going back to 1988. 2015, I expected. It was a weird year. The lake stratified very early, and there were all sorts of things that I could wave my hand at and say, well, maybe it's this and that. Last year was a reasonably normal year in terms of stratification and temperature, and yet I had the second lowest oxygen level by July. So there's something going on there. We can't do too much about it. It's very hard to treat. The lake's too big. Lake is too big for most of the kinds of in-lake treatment that you hear about. However, it should improve if the amount of algae in the lake can be reduced. So how do we reduce the lake, algae in the lake? Storm runoff carries increased phosphorus and sediment, and that phosphorus is absolutely available to feed the algae. Your TMDL is designed to reduce the phosphorus loading, and so if you reduce the phosphorus loading, that should reduce the amount of algae in the lake. That's how it works. The chlorophyll concentration and algal counts are still high throughout the lake, and that should also improve slowly if we reduce the phosphorus coming in from the storm runoff. The long-term goal, I think it's a 50-year goal. Is it a 50? I think, yeah, it's a 50-year goal. There's a long term. It took a long time. I mean, I've got data going to 88, and it was 90s before I really felt like there was something weird going on. It's going to take a long time to clean it up. So a 50-year goal is very realistic. But in the short term, you have water treatment needs that need to be addressed, and I don't know if the city is going to talk about, if Public Works is going to talk about that, but part of that includes, I think, dissolved air flotation, which is very effective. I've had people ask, does that mean that we don't have to worry as much, or will it somehow take away from the cleaning up the watershed? And they are completely separate issues. One of them is an immediate need for water quantity and quality. The other is a TMDL legal mandate. So, you know, they're not in conflict at all. More information about this is posted on the Institute for Watershed Studies website. We have a web page for Lake Whatcom. I also have posted all of the annual reports going back, I think, to 1990 on Western's Cedar Library, which is the digital archive. We moved them to Cedar last year because the digital archive provides very, very long-term backup so that I don't have to worry about the website going down. And I think, yes, and thanks to Mike Hillis and Joan Vandersype and Marilyn Desmond, who are Watershed Studies staff, Dr. Robert Mitchell, who's the Geology Department, Jeffrey Matthews, my brilliant computer scientist spouse over there, and all of the undergraduate and graduate students working on the project. So I think...
Thank you, Dr. Matthews.
Yes,
we do definitely have time for
Good.
questions. Council members or commissioners? Todd? Push the button.
Thank you. What was the last thing you mentioned about dissolved air filtration or flotation? I couldn't.
DAF, the dissolved air flotation. I haven't kept track of the status of it, but dissolved air flotation is part of the water treatment that is going to be put in place. And I know that there are other parts to it, alum chemicals and so on. Anyone who wants to talk is welcome to. But the DAF is microbubbles that float up through the water coming in, and they pull the algae up to the top, and you can skim it right off. I worked with the pilot project on that, and it went from lots and lots of algae. I counted the algae and chlorophyll. It went from lots to I settled 100 mills and I couldn't count cells. They were so sparse. So it's very effective.
It's basically a $14 million expenditure by the city to pre-treat our water. And so, Renee, do you want to say anything more
Want to say anything about it?
the status of that pre-treatment?
It's under construction now. It's a way to treat the water. It's a settlement. Sorry, it's a pre-treatment thing. I'm at a loss for words all of a sudden. And this is the first one in Washington State, but other jurisdictions have the pre-treatment settling basins. So it's a newer technology to solve an old problem. Bellingham hasn't needed this because our source water is such high quality, but because we want to be a good water purveyor and continue to offer a really good water quality product. Our water quality has won awards. We're taking the steps now. And as Robin mentioned, they're not mutually exclusive. We have a TMDL on the lake, and we have the Lake Whatcom Management Program that is aimed at reducing the phosphorus in the lake, but then the DAFT is aimed at offering a very high-quality drinking water.
Dan Hamill?
Yep. And I should mention one other thing. So it's pulling out algae. A lot of people think toxic algae. We don't have the toxic algae problem, but the algae that we have in Lake Whatcom are unbelievably sticky. And the ones that aren't sticky are long and fibrous. So it's basically like fiberglass on the top of those filters when those algae bloom. I use a chemical to stain them, and you can just see smears of the mucilage that the algae excrete. So not toxic, but really, really sticky.
Dan Hamill?
Dr. Matthews, you'd mentioned that the increase in phosphorus tends to create more costs in treating water, and that these issues around taste and odor are more prevalent. I'm just wondering how the new treatment facility, just for the public's sake, is going to be addressing those issues.
I'm really excited. As Renee said, it's not used in very many treatment facilities like ours. And the taste and odor, so the way the DAF works is by removing the algae, but that should also remove some of the organic carbon that the algae excrete. So I talked about the enzymes that they leak. They leak a lot of stuff into water, slime, enzymes, and taste and odor problems. And it will be interesting. I don't know for sure, but the theory is that it should help with the organic carbon, which might help with taste and odor. The city has a number of other things that they can do for taste and odor, and I know that they're real proactive when people call in.
Thank you.
Barbara Brenner?
Yeah, I bring this up each time, but I'm wondering, has anybody thought about using, in the basins that are more shallow, has anybody thought of using oxygenators to keep stratification from happening?
And that's a really good question. You want the lake to stratify.
Oh, you do?
If you don't stratify, so the history of lake management, de-stratifying a lake actually usually increases the amount of algae, because by circulating it, you move things that would normally be unavailable to the algae into the region. And the depth at which algae can photosynthesize then becomes the entire 20 meters instead of just the upper part. There are techniques where, without breaking the stratification, you introduce oxygen down to the bottom of the basin. They're very expensive, and they don't stop. They don't go away. So you have an ongoing maintenance cost associated with that. A lot of the lakes that have to deal with that have very sophisticated models to figure out just how long they can wait and how low the oxygen can go before they have to turn it on, because it's pretty expensive. There are lots of other approaches for very small sites that work quite well. But the problem with Lake Whatcom is that even the small basin is getting pretty big for a lot of the lake management tools that are used for things like ponds and lakes the size of Paddon.
Barry Buchanan?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the toxic algae.
Yes.
You said that's not a problem. Is that something that's never going to be a problem due to varieties of algae that we have here? Or?
We could turn the lake into something that would make it a problem. What makes toxic algae is more nutrients and low nitrogen. Remember I said we measure the nitrogen? I like to keep track of that in any lake that I look at, because low nitrogen and high phosphorus will trigger the kind of bloom that could very often be toxic. The toxic forms can fix N2, atmospheric nitrogen. None of the other algae can do that. And so in lakes that have lots of phosphorus and not very much nitrogen of the kind algae like, you get toxic blooms. Classic is Weiser, is a very serious problem. Heart Lake, I just finished a report on Heart Lake, and Heart Lake has almost no nitrate that the algae can have and lots of phosphorus, and it just gets massive blooms. Lake Whatcom could develop them, but we're a long way from that. It would have to be a completely different chemistry, and I have just, maybe I'm naive, but I have tremendous hope and faith that the TMDL and the concerted effort will keep that from happening. So I don't think you're going to be dealing with a toxic bloom in Whatcom. Wrong chemistry right now. Let's keep it that way.
Carl Weimer.
Thank you for the report. I think this is my 12th one of these meetings, and it's predictable that the couple of days leading up to that, we'll start hearing from people that have followed Lake Whatcom issues for years, and they'll say that this is all a charade, we aren't doing enough, we're not spending enough money, we're not regulating enough, we're not banning lots of things, and then they point at your report that shows everything's still going the wrong direction. What would you say to those people?
50 years.
Good question.
Come back in 50 years. It's a great question. The difficulty that we have, that's why I tried to make a point of that. It took a long time to develop the problem. And, I mean, it's human nature. We want to do something and then have it fixed. And the problem with the lake is that it's just too much water. It's too huge. The momentum of, basically, you would have to magically take everything out of the watershed, every single house, every single road out of the watershed magically, and you still would probably be looking at decades before the chemistry would come back into an adjustment. It's a very long process, and it requires a huge amount of kind of regulatory courage because you're not likely to see really clear, definitive changes in 5 or 10 years. It's going to be, there's a reason, I mean, the 50 years is very realistic. There is one little nice note that I've pointed, I didn't talk about it this time, but one of the things that used to be going up and is now flat are the blue-green algae counts. Now, they're not toxic blue-greens, but they're pretty flat, and that's good. The chlorophyll is still going up, so we haven't actually gotten at the problem of phosphorus limitation on the algae yet, but we're not seeing the steady increase in the type of algae that can really sort of cause problems. I don't think that's a very good answer, but it really is. You have to have more patience and be looking at it for future generations.
I would just say, I think we should say 49 years, not
49.
50.
Okay.
Todd Citron.
All right.
Is that on? Thank you, Dr. Matthews. One of the other programs that we jointly have is an aquatic invasive species eradication and prevention program. And I've heard that one of the potential issues with a situation, if we actually did get quagga and or zebra mussels into the lake, that infestation itself could change the chemistry of the lake. Could you elaborate on that and what the implications of that might be?
Yes, and you're talking about the quagga and the zebra, not the Asiatic, not the corbicula,
well,
right? Yeah, but so right now we have the Asiatic clam. We have a lot of them, probably self-sustaining. But the worst problem, the quagga and the zebra mussels are really designed to improve that. Yes, there are a number of studies that show that these little clams, basically mussels, clams, are able to pull phosphorus. They basically resuspend particles. And if you remember that picture I showed you, if you resuspend particles, you're resuspending phosphorus because algae release the enzymes that pull phosphorus off of particles. And so there's a lot of literature showing that they can contribute to the phosphorus. They're not likely to be a major source compared to, for example, watershed runoff. But when you're trying to look for ways to tweak the phosphorus down, the invasive, protecting against the invasive species introductions, especially of the larger forms, the quagga and the zebra, are really good approach. There are also other approaches. Just went to a thesis defense from a student who was talking about it, and I asked similar questions because I'm not an expert in the invasive mollusks. But in addition to the resuspension, there are problems with filter clogging with the quaggas. The corbicula, the Asiatic clam, doesn't like to be very deep, and the surveys that I know of in the lake haven't found them terribly deep, but some of the other invasive mollusks can get pretty deep, and so you have potential for clogging filter intake, and they've got very sharp shells, so they've got a lot of things associated with them. But there are studies suggesting that they resuspend phosphorus, which is not good.
Go ahead.
Dr. Matthews, I think that it's very appropriate for you to concentrate on phosphorus as the big player, but I also know that coliform is an issue, and could you bring us up to date on what's happening with that?
Okay. So it's not much of an issue in the lake. We've even done, so we measure out in the middle of the lake, and we never get anything out in the middle of the lake for coliforms. We have done surveys around the edge of the lake, and we don't get much there either. Coliforms are normally associated, especially the ones we're interested in, the fecal coliforms, are associated with the gut of a warm-blooded animal, and so you dump them in cold water, and not only is that a not very hospitable environment, the natural bacteria will outcompete, and they don't do too well. In the streams, however, we see very high levels of coliforms, and that is not something that we don't even monitor. We don't even do coliform analyses in watershed studies. It requires a certified lab, and we don't have the equipment for it. But the classic urban stream, you can predict what will be in it. There will be phosphorus. There will be coliforms. There will almost certainly be certain specific metals like zinc and so on. But the combination of coliforms and phosphorus are found in streams that have a lot of runoff across the surface of the ground. And it's just one of the classic. We've known since the National Urban Research Program in the 70s that coliforms, suspended solids, and nutrients are associated with urban runoff, residential runoff.
But the TMDL does have a problem with the level of coliform, and are we improving on that, or
right?
Is there...
I really would not be able to answer. That's outside my area. I'll tell you a lot about phosphorus. Not much about coliforms.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. I think we have time for one more question. I'll go ahead and take it. Do you think that we're measuring all that we need to measure for our purposes? I know as a scientist you might want to measure more, but for our purposes here, are we measuring everything we need to measure and the way we need to measure it to get the picture we need?
Oh, that's a mean question.
Wasn't meant to be.
So I think we're doing an amazing job. This is really an amazing data set going back to the 80s, and a really valuable partnership. As an aside, Western has won community service awards. It's a national community service awards, and Watershed Studies has been featured in those, and it's done it twice in the last 3 years. The first year it was for our Small Lakes program, but last year it was Small Lakes and Lake Whatcom because it's recognized as just a major partnership. We do a lot of really good work. The approach that is used in the current monitoring program is kind of the National Geographic approach, where we have certain things that we monitor for a long period of time. There are certain types of measurements that come up as a specific question. And when those come up, then we go out and look at them. We've done surveys on mercury in the lake with lower and lower detection levels. We've done surveys on, like I said, the coliforms around the edges. So my feeling is that we're doing, I don't want to say enough. That's a terrible thing for a scientist to have to say. But in terms of tracking what's going on, the only thing that we do want to make sure we keep up is correcting the model, because the model is something I don't do. I collect the data. I'm a scientist of what is and was, so I get what's current and what was in the past. The model is what will be. And you constantly need to collect the information now that feeds into the model and then recheck it. So the one thing that does need to continue is that kind of back and forth between your TMDL model, your estimates for phosphorus loading, and what's actually happening.
Thank you. That was a perfect segue, Dr. Matthews.
I
Thank you very much,
figured as
because
much.
up next is Kathy Craver from Whatcom County, and she'll giving us an update on the TMDL, Total Maximum Daily Load process. Ms. Craver.
Thank you. Let me just get this set up here. Okay. So yeah, once again, Kathy Craver, Whatcom County Public Works. And I'm going to talk about really briefly, it's going to be pretty brief on the TMDL, less of the technical side, but really just kind of highlight some milestones and some key pieces that have come into play last year and this coming year. And as was indicated earlier, the TMDL was approved by EPA nearly a year ago in 2016, and this is, we've been here a long time. It's been several years in the making to have the plan ready and go and approved, so we're pretty proud about that. And one of the highlights also that was touched upon was this 50-year timeline, and when the EPA had approved the plan, the City of Bellingham and Whatcom County did propose, and it was accepted. The acceptable time frame is 50 years, $100 million budget. Now, this is 2016 numbers, because how do we estimate really beyond kind of just our budget years for jurisdictions. So based on what we have done in the past with how much we've spent on different projects, where the technology is, staff time, that this felt like a fairly good proposal. So what we're going to do is move forward with that. What we got from the TMDL report was the target to remove 3,150 pounds, approximately, of phosphorus per year. And currently our annual removal rate is 410 pounds per year. So the near-term action that we have next on our agenda here is a detailed implementation plan. This is sort of the first formal submittal for ecology from the jurisdictions, knowing that we've had 5-year work plans and several, almost 2 decades worth of work plans from the jurisdictions and from the water district. And we've done a lot of work over the years. So even though we have this 50-year time frame, I think it's important to recognize that we have done a lot of work already, and we'll be improving upon that. So this detailed implementation plan, it's due by the end of October. It's a collaborative effort that's going to be submitted by City of Bellingham and Whatcom County. It gives the Department of Ecology very distinct milestones that we need to accomplish, that we feel we can accomplish over the 10-year time frame to keep us on track for phosphorus removal. An important piece of that, it aligns with our NPDES permit, our municipal stormwater permit, of which Whatcom County and City of Bellingham are both permittees for. These are mandated permits that we're probably pretty familiar with. The first 5 years of that 10-year detailed implementation plan does get incorporated into our 5-year permit. The permit cycle ends July 31st of 2018. So when that permit comes, the next permit comes out in August of 2018, Appendix 2 will have these very distinct tasks and milestones that the city and the county will have to accomplish. And then the last part, and this is the end of this part of the presentation, but kind of dovetailing on what Dr. Matthews had said about the model. There is a model. We are reviewing it. It is being updated. Data is being collected. What's mandated by the TMDL, what we accepted with ecology, is that we need to update the model every 10 years. That is the time frame. However, there is interest and there's a need. We will be looking at updating that sooner if we need to, if we have the data, and tweaking as we go along, because as we know, this target of 3,100 pounds and how many pounds per year, that is not a very, it's not a super precise number. So as we get more data, we can kind of dial that in, and we can kind of figure out how we address that, and that kind of impacts sort of our work plans along the way. That is all I have for the TMDL update.
Thank you, Kathy. Barbara?
Just a real quick one.
Yes.
Just a real quick one about what how well we're doing now and how well we need to do, and it was like so enormously different. Do we really expect to? Yeah, we're at 410 per year, and we want to get to 3150 per year. That seems like overwhelming.
Over 50 years, and
I know, but still, are we going to make it?
And Jason Porter from the city will talk a little bit more about that, but we've kind of 13% is quite a big first step that we've done, because we have done a lot of work in the previous years prior to the adoption of the TMDL. So we have a very good start.
I'll take your word for it.
Okay.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks for your presentation this evening. I'm just wondering if you can remind council members and commissioners what the cost per pound removed phosphorus in a capital stormwater facility versus a program like HIP program.
I am going to defer to one of the stormwater managers, possibly, or maybe Renee, on that figure.
Hi, Renee LaCroix, City of Bellingham. So just make sure I understand, you're asking what the price per pound removal is?
That's correct.
So it depends on the technology that we use. And we typically, when we're budgeting for these type of projects, we use a typical 50,000 per pound. But we have projects that are getting better than that, and we have projects that are not getting that.
Is the 50,000 per pound in a HIP type program, or is that in a facility, a stormwater facility?
Stormwater facility.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anyone else? I do have a question, Kathy. Actually, it's really more a comment. The 50-year target, as I understand it, is a statutory maximum. We couldn't have gone slower if we wanted to. And I think that's a point that I've brought up before, that this council has brought up before. We passed a resolution indicating our desire to not meet the minimum standard, to take as long as possible, but to accelerate that any way possible by looking for ways to increase our funding, or to find new grant sources, or to improve our effectiveness, our pound of phosphorus moved per dollar. I think it would be a shame if we hit the target at 50, right? I'd much rather we hit the target sooner.
Great, and you bring up a really good point that I did miss, and that is that this is the proposal. So this comes down to $1 million a year per jurisdiction, right, if we just kind of go straight math. And that is what the jurisdictions will come forward with. Grant money is kind of like the topping. Anything other money that we are able to acquire, any other, shared incomes, something like that, those are all going to be extra that we could definitely put forward. And I think we've shown that we're always looking to do bigger, better, faster.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Roxanne?
After working on this committee and over the last 4 years, one of the things that it's taught me too is that we never know what's going to happen with technology advancements, and so this price could definitely change, and it could rapidly accelerate the way that we would treat this. So the foreseeable future, we're going to keep heading on this path because we want to treat our lake with that much respect. At the same time, the future could hold even stronger improvements for us.
Anyone else? Okay, Kathy, thank you very much. We'll now move on. I'm going to introduce, or she was already up here, Renee Lacroix, who is our Assistant Director of Public Works. She will begin the next segment. She actually, oh, hold on, got my notes wrong. Oh, Gary, you're going to begin. Okay, so the next section, the next section is going to have different staff members from the county and the city. Each one will introduce the next one, and I'm going to introduce Mr. Gary Stojka.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Woodquist. Again, Gary Stojka, Natural Resources Manager for Whatcom County Public Works. This portion of and the rest of the program this evening, we're going to go through the highlights of what has happened in the 2016, and also move on to highlight some things that are going to be happening coming up in 2017. As you probably are aware, all the work we're doing right now is included in the 2015 to 2019 work plan that was adopted by the councils and commissions back in April of 2015. So we're in the second year of that work plan. And that work plan was also the fourth five-year work plan. So that is the guide for all the work we're doing. And we just submitted our 2016 report, was just out recently, and we've adopted kind of a standard format for that report. So at least in the last couple of years, you can look at that report and kind of compare year to year, because they're very similar looking. Here is just the outline for the report and also our whole Lake Whatcom management program. Our program is divided into 10 program areas, and I'm just going to touch on a few of them this evening. The city, the county, and the district are collaborating on a lot of these, so a lot of parts of all of our jurisdictions are involved in a lot of these. We already discussed Section 4, the monitoring data. Dr. Matthews discussed that. We're also going to look at land preservation program this evening, as well as stormwater, and we're going to look at a couple of components of stormwater, one being the major capital portion, and also, as was already mentioned, the homeowners incentive program. We're also going to touch on the aquatic invasive species program, and of course, and recreation program, and of course, education and engagement. And with that, I will introduce Jason Porter, the Stormwater Manager of the City of Bellingham Public Works Department.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Porter. I'm the more recent Storm and Surface Water Manager for the City of Bellingham. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to introduce myself because I haven't had a chance to meet many of the people here. I've been with the City of Bellingham for 12 years in the field of stormwater. I started my first 2 years as a stormwater inspector. After completing that time, I then was able to obtain the stormwater utility engineer position, which I held for 10 years until October of 2016, where I recently started as the stormwater manager for the city. So many of you are familiar that the city of Whatcom County have started implementing stormwater capital facilities since about 2001. Since then, we've constructed about 65 end-of-pipe or inline treatment systems that treat about 1,000 acres of runoff and remove approximately 410 pounds of phosphorus. Like what Kathy was talking about earlier, we have a total goal of 3,150 pounds, and so the 410 pounds that we have removed means that we're at about 13% of our goal. There's different ways of looking at that, but one of the things that I like to look at is that, you know, we're in year one of our 50-year plan, and that we've been able to achieve about 13% of our phosphorus mitigation within that first year. I think a lot of that goes back to the proactive approach that the city and county have done to really take this issue serious early on before it became a mandated requirement through ecology. And so all the work that we had done in the past has really led us to this point of being at least 13% by the first year. The table here on the slide that we have up is really to kind of show you how the types of systems that we're installing and using are improving over time. So you can see in about 2001 to 2007, we were installing capital facilities that really utilized physical filtration as a means of phosphorus removal. These physical filtration systems included catch basin filters, grassy swales, and rain gardens. And they really had a fairly low efficiency range of about 6 to 50% for the removal efficiency for phosphorus. As we're moving into a more recent future, so in 2007 to 2013, we start utilizing stormwater facilities that use physical and chemical filtration. These systems include sand filters and filter vaults that utilize specialty treatment medias that usually have a component in there similar to activated alumina or another product that go to bind the soluble phosphorus that we might be targeting. These systems run in a range removal efficiency of about 35 to 66%. So you can see that we're greatly increasing that treatment level. In 2013, today, we now have systems available. And when I say systems available, these are systems that ecology has evaluated and approved to achieve a certain amount of removal efficiency, right? So we don't just invent these systems. We really utilize the Department of Ecology and other proprietary systems to come up with these for us. So these newer systems are using physical, chemical, and biological filtration. These systems are media filters and other proprietary or privately owned treatment systems. These systems now often include a treatment train. So before, instead of having just a standalone filter type system, we now will have a pre-treatment mechanism that would then go into maybe a filtering type system, and then often that it would be followed by like an infiltration component to reduce the amount of stormwater leaving the system, which would then carry phosphorus with us. So these newer systems now have a treatment range when we utilize the treatment trains of achieving 65 to about 87% phosphorus removal. The highest removal rates are those systems that utilize infiltration because of just the total reduction in stormwater runoff that we can get. This is a graphic that many of you are probably familiar with. We've been showing it fairly consistently over the years. And what it's trying to show are all the sub-basin areas that are currently being served by stormwater capital facilities or have received restoration projects to reduce their overall amount of phosphorus coming off of that. You can see that the city and county have been primarily focusing in the urbanized areas associated with Basin 1 for the project. In 2016, Whatcom County constructed the only stormwater facility we had for that year. The facility was constructed and located in the Cedar Hills Euclid Park area. The system constructed by Whatcom County consists of a treatment train. They had native landscaping component. They had channel restoration and stabilization. They then had a pre-treatment structure, which was a swirl unit that used centrifugal force to move larger materials out. That system then reduces the total load that goes into the next treatment train. It then moved into a bioinfiltration system, which you can see under construction here. And then after the bioinfiltration, it then went into a storm filter facility. So you can see how we're utilizing these treatment trains to achieve a higher level of efficiency. This system installed by the county treats about 48 acres and removes approximately 27 pounds of phosphorus annually. So in 2017, the city and county have got some more stormwater projects planned. The city's got projects planned on East Oregon Street and East North Street. And Whatcom County's got several projects planned in the Agate Bay area. So like I said, the City of Bellingham is planning on doing stormwater facility improvements on East North and East Oregon Street. East North Street is an area that currently is not served by a stormwater facility, so it was an opportunity for us to install a new system that's treated in an untreated area. East Oregon Street is served, or at least a portion of it, by a more simple system that was installed a few years ago. It was really targeting suspended solids and providing a basic level of water quality treatment. Our consultants and city staff identified that this would be a really good location for a retrofit. We have most of the existing infrastructure in place, so we didn't have to do a whole bunch of pipe work and a whole bunch of other infrastructure work to be able to get this stormwater into a facility. The facilities that we're planning on doing are a proprietary system. They're called a modular treatment wetland. The next slide, I'll go in a little bit more detail of what they are. They're kind of an interesting system on how they work. Somewhat of a rain garden in a box, but with some other treatment mechanisms contained within it. And the systems that we're going to be installing for these two projects will treat approximately 40 acres combined and remove an estimated 21 pounds of phosphorus. If you can bear with me here, we have a little video that I have to jump past the commercial aspects of it. All right. So I'll do a brief narration on this. Are we moving here? All right. So the system we'll be using, ours will be slightly different than this, but what the stormwater will do is it comes into the system and there's a pre-treatment system on that, and it's called a coarse screen that will remove detritus, leaves, and trash. Once it moves through that primary screening device, it then would go into, they call it hydrodynamic separation, but it's a sump, and it allows materials to settle out. So you can see in the graphic there, you would settle out some of the debris. Once that stormwater has reached a certain elevation within the structure, it then moves laterally through these columns. They've got a coarse filtering material that provide a higher level of pre-treatment than the settling and the screening. Once the water is moved through these coarser filters, it goes into a secondary treatment bay. The secondary treatment bay is where we're actually utilizing the physical, chemical, and biological treatment to remove and sequester phosphorus. The water will surround the bay. Once the water is surrounded the bay, it moves laterally through the media. It's a soil-based media, and into centralized perforated pipes where the stormwater is then collected, carried into an underdrain system, and ultimately discharged from the structure. The system that the city's installing is going to be very similar to this, but oftentimes what we would see is a system like this followed by an infiltration component, right? And so if we've got the available space and we've got the geotechnical conditions to support infiltration, that's almost always the most cost-effective way of removing phosphorus. I'll turn this off now. And so that would be what we typically see. The systems we are installing, we didn't have the room, space, or the soil conditions to be able to incorporate the infiltration component of that. But we've found that tends to be one of the most cost-effective systems that we can install. I'm going to jump back to the slide previous. One of the things that we found with this particular system that is able to help us achieve a higher level of removal efficiency as well as reduce the total dollar cost for pounds of phosphorus is that this facility type has been approved for continuous flows. That means you can send water through the filter in a continuous manner. Most of these biologically based systems need to have a dry out period, right? And so if we saturate the soil to the point that it reaches an anoxic condition or a low dissolved oxygen, the chemistry changes within that soil, and we find that it greatly reduces its potential for phosphorus mitigation, as well as it could potentially release some of those nutrients that we're trying to capture. So the system that we've selected is able to have a continuous flow to it, and so we're able to treat a larger basin area with a smaller footprint because of the type of facility. So for 2017, Whatcom County has a two-phased project planned for the Agate Bay area. 2017, they will be constructing phase 1. It's very hard to see in the monitors here, but there's some orange outlines. Those are the sub-basin areas that will be treated by their phase 1 project. Whatcom County will be utilizing for this project channel stabilization, native landscaping, pre-treatment structures, and then going into these filter vaults. So again, it's difficult to see on the monitors here, but you can see in the right-hand slide there those black canisters. Those are the actual filters themselves. These vaults come in pre-constructed sizes, and you can plug the filters in that you would need for the amount of runoff you need. These filters underneath those black hoods have an advanced treatment media. It's proprietary. It's called Phossorb, and it's an activated alumina type material that uses chemical filtration to bind to the phosphorus to remove. So this system here would use the physical filtration and then the chemical filtration for their removal efficiency. We have some interesting things coming in 2018. We've debated on whether or not we're going to talk to them too much. I think we're going to try and save some of that for next year's presentation. But the city is really trying to look at, and we can talk a bit about it, we're really trying to look at developing systems that aren't necessarily proprietary, right? So we don't have to worry about buying a particular product continuously from a manufacturer, as well as we're trying to reduce the cost for pounds of phosphorus removal. So the city is going to be working on that in the coming years, and so it's kind of exciting. So next year, we'll have some more exciting things to talk about than the simple, smaller projects that we constructed this year. And with that, that's all we have to report back on our stormwater capital facilities.
We have a question from Barbara.
Sure. It makes me nervous to hear you say how many times you say proprietary.
Yeah.
How much do we really get to have control over proprietary stuff and make sure it works right?
Well, part of this is the way that these systems are evaluated. So you have to have resources, you got to have money. And so what companies are doing is finding that phosphorus is an issue across the country, and so there's a market. And so these companies go through a testing process to get their media or special blend of treatment soil approved through ecology, and they typically will hold the trademark or the copyright or patent for that material. It takes quite a bit of resources to be able to develop these medias and then take them through the testing and protocol. And so right now, it's mostly private companies that are doing this. And so the systems that we're finding that are working the best, that have the highest removal efficiency for dollars spent, are these proprietary systems.
And just one quick follow-up. When you were talking about biological filter, or biological whatever, did you mean the plants?
Well, it's the microbial, it's the plant, but it's also the microbial community that's living within that media or soil that's in there.
I mean, do you put microbes in there, or are they just...
No, they'll grow themselves in there. Sometimes there is a period of time for that community to really grow and become robust. But it's stuff we naturally find in soils, and we're just using what nature has.
Todd, you had a question?
Thanks for the presentation. My question goes back to phosphorus, and if you can help answer it, that would be great. If not, maybe Dr. Matthews or Steve Hood could help with this. The term phosphorus is used, and then the term soluble phosphorus is used, and I'm looking at the different percentages of phosphorus removal. So I guess the first question is, when you say phosphorus removal, does that also mean soluble phosphorus removal?
Yes, it would be total phosphorus. Yeah.
Okay. And so if we're only getting a certain percent effectiveness, and I'm sensing that based on the presentation by Dr. Matthews that soluble phosphorus is sort of like the algae's crack cocaine or something like that. And if say 10% is getting by or 20% is getting by, does it matter that we got 80% or 60% if that 20% is still getting by? Is there a qualitative, is there some sort of way that the amounts are not directly associated with the amount of growth, but that the quality of the phosphorus that's getting by also affects that? So if it's soluble phosphorus or mostly soluble phosphorus that's getting through, does it matter that we got the rest of the other kind of I don't know what the other kind is, but I'm hearing the terms, so I'm saying there's phosphorus and there's soluble phosphorus. Does it matter then if we've gotten 80%, if we're still getting 20% of the crack cocaine through to the rest of the community of phosphorus consumers?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be the most qualified person to really answer that question on that. But from what we understand and believe, that what we're trying to do is remove as much phosphorus as possible, whether it be soluble or the other forms. Our goals and belief is that the reductions that we're achieving are going to help the lake, and as we continue to have these more and more systems installed, we can continue to reduce that. Whether or not having that 5, 10%, whatever the unknown percent of soluble that would make it through our facilities is still okay for the lake and would help us achieve our goal, I wouldn't be able to answer that. Maybe someone else, Robin, or someone could.
Yeah, Dr. Matthews, if you would come up here. So I believe the question is there a clear linear relationship? If more gets in, you get more algae, or is there like a cutoff, or is it more dynamic?
Well, I like that crack cocaine, because that's
Yes.
right. But the good news is I was very intrigued by this, because biological treatment, soluble phosphorus is also called reactive phosphorus, because anything living will take it up. And so biological treatment is just great for getting that. It's also a tiny, tiny fraction. Total phosphorus includes organic phosphorus, inorganic phosphorus, and a portion of the inorganic is soluble. So it's all of that. But usually only about 3% of the total phosphorus is soluble. So it's probably a tiny fraction of soluble that gets through, and if you have any kind of soil microbes that can interact with it, they're going to slurp it up as fast as possible. That's the reason I showed that reactive chamber with the green on one side, because that's reacting not to soluble but to total phosphorus. So the total phosphorus is the one that moves with particles and is a much larger fraction of what's coming in the runoff. So the soluble, if a little bit gets through, it probably won't linger, because we don't measure much. It's almost undetectable in the lake, the soluble fraction. So.
Terry Borneman?
Yeah, I understand mostly how the filter systems works, and makes a lot of sense. But it's all contingent on the amount of water that gets by your first screen, the one that takes out all the solids. Given the amount of solids that come down in storm events, how often do you have to manually clean those, or how do you to clean it to make sure that the water is actually getting through to the filtering system?
Most often, these systems are designed to have about a 1-year maintenance frequency. But when we install them, we do monitor them in their early installations to see what the loading may be on there. But most of them, again, these are these proprietary systems. They've been evaluated to achieve about a 1-year annual maintenance cycle, dependent upon the loading, like you were saying. So, right, if we've got a dirt road, gravel driveway that's draining into our system, that's much higher loading, and so we would expect to have a higher frequency of maintenance on that. I'm not aware that we do any maintenance at an increased frequency of more than every 6 months. We're on an annual cycle for most of these systems.
Any further questions? Thank you, Jason.
All right,
Who's up
so
next?
I would like to introduce Ingrid to talk about our homeowner incentive program. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So I'm Ingrid Enschede with Whatcom County Public Works, and I'll give you an update on our Lake Whatcom Homeowner Incentive Program. So I've been with the county since 2009, but I'm new to the HIP team as of April this year. So they sent the new person up this year. So of course, we need a homeowner incentive program because we have homes surrounding the lake. Lots of developed older residential neighborhoods generating dirty runoff coming off the landscape. A quick reminder of the Homeowner Incentive Program, what it is. It started in 2011, ran from 2011 to 15 in what we're calling our pilot period with help from the Department of Ecology grant. And again, this is a voluntary, non-regulatory program. It helps homeowners who choose to participate by giving them technical assistance and cost share funds to install water quality improvements, or what we call best management practices, or BMPs, on their property. The goal is, of course, to reduce phosphorus and other pollutants running off the residential landscapes, and we need to reduce that runoff and reduce the pollutants from the lot by lot, because we can't achieve all of our TMDL objectives through just the capital projects alone, similar to what you just heard Jason talk about. So 2016 was a year of change and transition for the HIP program. It was wrapping up work that was initiated in 2015, and that included projects on individual properties, homeowner properties. It also included the City of Bellingham completing the phase 2 of a demonstration project at Silver Beach Elementary School. But the primary energy in staff and resources in 2016 went into developing and beginning implementation of this new and improved HIP program, which you've heard us call HIP 2.0. So you've seen this chart below, or not below, you've seen this chart before. So this is our cumulative progress with the HIP program since it started in 2011. So the blue is the number of site visits. So you'll see that taper off because we did not take on any new projects in 16. We were focusing on developing the new program. But we did finish a few more projects overall, that's the orange, and more BMPs, because most projects contain more than one BMP, maybe a rain garden and a native landscaping component, something like that. So we're now at a grand total of 194 projects to date completed, and a total of 445 BMPs on the ground through the Homeowner Incentive Program. Some examples of BMPs that were installed last year from the upper left going clockwise, you have native landscaping, an infiltration dry well, so underneath those pretty pavers is an infiltration system. Going down to Silver Beach Elementary, you see again an infiltration system that ran around the perimeter of the playing field. And then lastly, a dispersion system. This is where the water is directed into that gravel trench, fills up the trench, and then disperses and flows down through a protected area downhill of native landscaping, so mimicking that forest setting. So a quick refresher of the changes and improvements that we've been spending so much time on for the Homeowner Incentive Program. And we've Last year, you heard us present in depth at the Lake Whatcom Policy Group meetings and the Surface Water Work sessions on all these improvements. But a quick reminder, we're expanding the area to all of Basin 1 and Basin 2. That's about doubled the number of eligible properties. We're developing a two-tiered program where the most resources are going towards properties that have the most potential to reduce phosphorus. So that's going to be properties that drain directly to shorelines, directly to creeks, or have very large lawns. Everyone else will qualify for assistance with native landscaping projects. We're offering improved financial incentives. We've engaged a third-party messenger. Research showed that homeowners would be more receptive to someone other than the regulatory city-county staff coming out to work with them. We've worked really hard to streamline projects, make them easier to design and install. And we're working towards certifying private designers and contractors. So that's an overview of the changes that are coming to the HIP program. So in 2016, we finished up the pilot and evaluation portion of evaluating the pilot program and what we could do better to reduce barriers to participation. So we really got down to business figuring out the nuts and bolts of how a two-tiered program would work. We developed new outreach tools and materials to use this year. We've developed new design tools and materials. We have 2 new interlocal agreements, one between the city and the county, and one between the county and the Whatcom Conservation District, who we're so excited to be a new partner providing that staff support as the third-party non-regulatory liaison with the homeowners. So some examples of the new outreach materials that were developed last year. These are handouts for the different BMPs for homeowners. So you see a new logo, coloring scheme, nice handouts to really, hey, I want a rain garden, and what is it? This is an example of a new design tool. This is one of 8 different landscape designs that were developed by a landscape architect. So they highlight they're for different types of soil types, aspects, sun exposure, property types. And the idea is now you have kind of homeowners can, or designers can cut and paste or pick and choose, copy portions of this that they think would apply to their own property. Last year, we developed new standard design details for the different BMPs. Also, some standard material specification sheets. These were vetted with stakeholder input last November. And standard sizing calculators, so you don't have to be an engineer to figure out how big to make your rain garden or your infiltration system. And I'd like to introduce Jenny Coe, who's here in the audience. So Jenny is our new HIP coordinator through the Whatcom Conservation District. She comes to us from many years of experience working with homeowners for the Skagit Conservation District. And she's a great asset. She just started in February, so we're looking forward to sending her out to get her hands dirty and work with people in the watershed. So what do we have planned for 2017? So 2017, we're actually going to do it. We're going to launch HIP 2.0. So what does that mean? Well, first, starting in April, we're going to reach out to our list of existing homeowners that we know are interested in the program. We're going to invite them to utilize our new outreach materials, like a new website and the handouts that I showed. We're offering designer and contractor certification trainings in April and May. So we'll have certified designer and contractors ready to hit the ground running, hopefully around May and June. Jenny's going to go out and start working with those homeowners. We're going to have do-it-yourself workshops for people to install native landscaping projects, and the goal is to start building projects again by summer and fall of 2017. So that's all I have for HIP. Are we taking questions as we go?
If you don't mind, Ingrid,
Sure.
thank you very much. Questions for Ingrid about HIP 2.0? Todd?
Is that working? Okay, thank you. I think HIP is not only a great program for what it's doing in terms of on-the-ground removal of phosphorus just in the field and making that, little by little, making that difference. It's also, in many ways, the face of our whole program in the community to be educating people about phosphorus and about what their impacts are in the watershed. And I think that's should be highlighted and is commendable. I do want to take the opportunity, and I've said it here before, and folks in the policy group have heard me say it, and it's directed largely at the council. I feel like to get to 3150 pounds per year removal is going to rely largely on removal or mitigation on private property. And folks in the watershed currently are not contributing at all to that effort monetarily. And in order to move beyond incentive, I think that some sort of revenue generating instrument needs to be implemented, and the stormwater management district is one that I personally would recommend. There are other ways of doing that, but until that happens, I think that we will only creep towards that goal with incentives. If everyone is participating, then everyone will have the incentive to utilize the funds that they themselves are contributing to participate in the mitigation on their own properties. And so I'm encouraging, once again, the county to look at that issue and for the county executive to place that as a high priority on the agenda. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. I'm just going to address your first point really quickly, and then Gary's here to respond to the second point. But thank you for pointing out the hard to quantify but very important benefits of building a sense of watershed stewardship and sort of a community ethic and social norm of taking care of the watershed, which is a really important component of this program. So thank you for reminding us of that point. And Gary?
Sure. On the funding issue, the county is currently engaged in a process of evaluating our water resources funding, including that for the Lake Whatcom watershed and the HIP program. So that's something that we're working on right now, going forward.
Councilor Pinky Vargas.
Not so much a question, but a comment. I want to say that 2.0 looks pretty fantastic. We've been watching this program for a long time, and I know that it wasn't always so easy for people to use. I have neighbors who've gone through it, and it's an amazing program. But I really want to commend the team, the city and the county, and for the work they did and the improvements, because these are much user-friendly tools. They don't seem as scary, and I think having 2 tiers and prioritizing where the most important phosphorus losses can be prevention is really important. So I think we're really going to see the difference this year in how many people engage with the difference of the actual program being easier to use and easier to understand, and not being government coming to inspect your yard. So I think all of those things are really a great step forward. So thank you to your team for 2.0.
Thank you.
Todd Donovan.
Yeah, I don't know the button, okay. Who this question is exactly directed to, but in the page and the little handout here, it says that the HIP program's doing 26 pounds of phosphorus removal on 33 acres, and then the slides we had up a couple minutes ago were 21 pounds and 40 acres. Are those numbers at all comparable, or is it really a site-specific? Because if I can say, like, 26 pounds off 33 acres, that HIP number looks better than whatever the 21 pounds for 40 acres. Are those at all comparable, or are they just completely different projects in terms of which one's working better?
really, I could let Jason respond to this, but really it's very site specific. It depends on what kind of treatment you're doing and what kind of area you're capturing, what kind of runoff you're having in that area. So it's very, very specific to the project. I don't think not generally. There's no
There could be a
generalization.
lot more phosphorus load coming to one
Right.
site than another site.
Right.
Okay.
Barbara Brenner?
Just following up on what Todd had said, you were showing that one of the things you said was you're going to increase financial incentives. How does that fly with what Todd said about needing more money? Who's going to?
So we're currently, the new program will offer $1.30 per square foot of improved area. So that could mean 1,000 square feet of native landscaping, or that could mean 1,000 square feet that drains to some sort of infiltration system. We currently have budget from city and county, budget authority to cover, at least in the immediate need, those incentives. Until we really get up and running with this new program and see what sort of demand is and how big of projects people want to do, I guess we'll reevaluate in the future. But right now, for the short term, we have the budget funding that we need.
And that number you gave is the increased financial incentive?
Yes, so it's really going to depend on how large of projects people want to install and what's going to work on their property and what they're going to be able to afford to work with and then wait and get reimbursement after it's done.
Commissioner John Carter?
Yes, Ingrid, thank you very much for the presentation. In the report, I see that last year was spent almost $2.2 million on the HIP program. What's the funding level for this year, and is that part of the $100 million commitment that we had heard about earlier?
So it wasn't that much spent last year, right?
That number includes both the HIP program and all the capital projects
Okay.
we talked about.
So what is the funding level for the HIP program then?
So it's 450 about?
About 500,000 between the city and the county combined, yeah.
And is it part of the total that we had been told before of the $2 million a year for 50 years, approximately?
I think so, yes, yeah.
Ingrid, earlier there was a question about the cost per pound removed. In this case, where the public coffers are only paying a kind of percentage, an incentive, do we have an estimate on the cost per pound of phosphorus removed, from the public coffers? Maybe the whole project is more expensive, but from the public point of view, is it cheaper, on par? I know you say there's site-to-site variation, but on average, can you give me an estimate?
So Eli has that number off the top of his head. He's done the analysis. I'll caveat that with there is, it's an average, right?
Please introduce yourself too.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Eli Makowitz, City Bellingham Natural Resources. Very quickly, the phosphorus pounds, the dollars per pound that we've seen through the first version of HIP, we landed at about $30,000 a pound. We did have a lot of do-it-yourself projects, so we expect that to increase as we have designer and contractor-led publicly or private company-led projects. We think that'll increase a little bit, but we've increased our incentive to cover that as well. And just to Councilperson Donovan's question about the phosphorus reduction numbers that we achieve in HIP versus capital projects, HIP projects use native landscaping to take things that are phosphorus sources like lawn and turn them into phosphorus sinks. So that's almost 100% or an 80% reduction when you do that. We also use infiltration quite a bit, which, as Jason showed you, has one of the highest phosphorus removals. So when you're relying on an end of the pipe system to filter your phosphorus, you're going to get a lot lower phosphorus removal than when you're doing source control, preventing the sources from the beginning, and then doing the best available treatment, which is infiltration, on that property. So that's why we've achieved around an 80% reduction through HIP when our capital projects are about 66%. So.
Eli, you said about, on average, roughly $30,000 per pound removed.
Yes.
For capital projects, I think it's more like a factor of 10 higher, sometimes 300,000.
Right now, for our capital projects, for the construction costs, we're looking at an average of around $50,000 a pound. But then you work in the design costs and the long-term maintenance, and the only way we have to really consider that is to look at the study that CH2M Hill did, the cost-benefit analysis, and they came up with something about $140,000 a pound life cycle costs that included the maintenance and then the replacement of that system at the end of its life.
Thank you. Any further questions for Ingrid? Okay, thank you. Who's next?
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Renee.
Thank you, Ingrid. Renee LaCroix, City of Bellingham, Assistant Public Works Director. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk to you about our aquatic invasive species program and our property acquisition program. For 2016, it was our 4th year of mandatory inspections. The season ran from April 23rd through September 29th, and during that time, we had 9,571 inspections conducted at Lake Whatcom and Lake Sammamish, which is an increase from the year before. And the reasons for those increases are that we had additional hours and days of operation at both our Lake Sammamish and South Bay sites, and we had additional staff that was able to do off-site inspections before the actual season started at our main inspection points. We had 1,800 people take the online AIS awareness course, and that's a wonderful educational tool. If you take the course, you can also get a $10 reduction on your permit. I would encourage everybody to take it, even if you're not interested in boating on Lake Whatcom, just because it is really informative. It's been a great tool for us. And in 2016, we also implemented electronic data collection, and this makes our inspectors much more efficient in the moment at the inspection station, so people can get through the checkpoints faster. And it also reduces the need to post-process a lot of the information they collect at the site. So by the numbers, like I mentioned, we had 9,571 boats that were inspected. The vast majority of those were at our Bloedel Donovan site up here. We had 5,492 inspections happen there, and the next highest was at Lake Sammamish, where we had 1,963 inspections. And then we also had inspections, the offsite inspections at private residences and at our offices, and then the Sudden Valley Marina and South Bay, where we had increased hours. While the inspectors are out there inspecting the boats, they're also talking to all the people that are using the park that don't have a boat and really are just kind of interested in what's going on. And so we were able to have contact with another 2,145 visitors that just wanted to know what was going on and don't really have any knowledge of why we do what we do. So it's a great opportunity to educate the public. Of the boats we inspected, we found 201 boats carried standing water that could be a threat to our lakes, and so that water had to be drained. 140 boats had aquatic plants that had to be removed before the boat could launch again because they were threats to our lakes. And we had 3 boats that had recently launched in mussel-infested water bodies that had to be decontaminated prior to launching at Lake Whatcom or Lake Sammamish. And this is a graph that shows where the boats come from before they hit Lake Whatcom or Lake Sammamish. And so you can see the darker the blue, the more boats we get from that area. So it makes sense that we have most of the boats that come to Lake Whatcom are from Washington and BC. But we also have people coming from as far afield as New Hampshire, Florida, and Hawaii. So it's interesting to note, too, that the majority of the states have quagga mussels and zebra mussels. And so Washington and Lake Whatcom specifically is still unique and is worthy of extra efforts to protect it. So in total, there were 604 water bodies that the boats were at before they launched in Lake Whatcom, which represented 39 states and provinces. Our 2017 program, the preseason started February 1st. So we don't have any inspectors at the check stations yet, but we are going out to the off-season sites to inspect boats. Our official season starts April 22nd and will run roughly till September 29th. We will again have increased hours of operation at Lake Sammamish and Sudden Valley. We're offering the online AIS awareness course again, and we're continuing with the electronic data system for the reasons I already mentioned. For our land preservation program, to date, we have protected 9,950 acres throughout the watershed. The purple represents the city's property acquisition program, and through that program, we've protected 2,150 acres, and we've removed 800 development units from the watershed. The green represents the Whatcom County reconveyance lands. And we're going to zoom into what we actually purchased in 2016. In the north end of the lake, we purchased 3 properties, which totaled 86 acres. The Marlin property, the Morrill property, and the Van Gaskin property. So of all that property, you might wonder what happens after we buy it. It depends on the property and what kind of condition it is in and what it needs. We do have, the city is extremely fortunate in that we sponsor 2 Washington Conservation Corps crews, and the county sponsors 1. And those crews have an increasing role in managing and stewarding the properties in Lake Whatcom watershed. So in the UE property, where the yellow star is, the crews planted close to 12,000 conifers on that property in 2016. So we're actively reforesting. And the WCC crews, because of their federal AmeriCorps connection, they play a role in national disaster response. So our crews have responded to Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy. They responded to the Oso landslide, and they also responded to the Storm Mountain fire in the Lake Whatcom watershed and help extinguish it. So in 2016, we also added new staff. So this is Michael Parlskin, who's in the audience with us. Stand up. Thank you. He has a master's degree in education. He spent a couple years in Oregon working with their conservation crews, and then has been most recently a supervisor on the city's conservation crews. And he's greatly skilled, and we're happy to have him on board. And now I'm going to hand it off to Gary.
Actually, are there any questions right now for Renee on this portion, or just move along? Okay, Gary, go ahead.
Thank you. Gary Stoika again, and we're almost done for folks getting a little bit tired. So this is the last segment. I'm going to just talk about recreation and education and engagement activities. To cover a few things that our Parks Department, Whatcom County Parks Department, is up to. At last year's meeting, we updated you that the new reconveyance lands, the trail plan, was going through the process of being adopted. And I can tell you that in October of last year, the Whatcom County Council adopted that trail plan. It has now moved into the implementation phase. And for those who don't know, the part east of the lake is now called Lake Whatcom Park, and the part west of the lake is now called Lookout Mountain Forest Preserve. And the trail plan includes the construction of 90 miles of new trails. And in this, I'm not sure how well this is showing up, but the solid lines, where do they go? The solid lines represent trails that are planned for construction between now and 2021. And the dashed lines are trails, again, it keeps going away, are trails that are planned for construction beyond 2021. Here is a close-up of the Lake Whatcom Park, so on the east side of the lake, near the existing Lake Whatcom Park. And I'm going to highlight this to show you what's happening in 2017. The Parks Department is going to construct approximately 2 miles of 36-inch wide natural surface tread, hike, and bike trail. And it's going to go from the existing trail network. Here are the existing parking areas, and this brown is the existing trail. And this purple shows you where the new trail is going to be constructed. It's going to go from the existing trail network all the way up to a viewpoint at an elevation of 1,300 feet. This map also shows you a lot of the critical areas that had to be evaluated during the trail planning process to make sure that we're staying away from creeks, steep slopes, sensitive plants, and wetlands, and that sort of thing. In addition to the construction of this new trail, this blue line here shows an existing user-built trail that's going to be decommissioned. This trail was, user-built, so it wasn't built according to any standards, and it's built in an unsustainable way that's susceptible to erosion and other things. So there's also a little segment of it up here that's going to be decommissioned. Here is another view of that same trail. This aerial photo landscape kind of view. And so here's this brown is the existing trail network, and the orange is the new trail. And here is a photo from the overlook, so pretty impressive view from up there. This map also shows you kind of some of the constraints. You know, there's steep slopes and all those sensitive areas we had to I say we royally, I mean, you know, the Parks Department, had to consider. We got the BPA easement here and the existing Forest Service or existing forest road there, so they had to take that into account when they designed the location of the trail. So quite a few constraints on that. Parks Department and the county in general wants to certainly thank the community partners listed here. These are organizations that have been involved since the beginning of the reconveyance, and they have provided help throughout that entire process, and plan to provide help through the implementation phase by providing time, expertise, volunteers, and just general commitment and support to the process. So we definitely want to thank them for all their efforts in making this trail plan a reality. Now I'd like to switch gears just a little bit and talk about education and engagement. As Renee mentioned with the AIS program, and as Ingrid mentioned with the HIP program, a lot of our efforts in the last several years in education and engagement have been program specific. Education and engagement are just integral parts of both of those programs. It's hard to break it out. Every site visit that Eli did last year or that Jenny is going to do this year, that's a wonderful outreach and education experience, as well as every boat owner interaction with the boat owner for the AIS program. So those have been our efforts in recent years. And we also are maintaining our Whatcom County, Lake Whatcom Management Program website. We're keeping that up for more of our general programs, as well as the City of Bellingham is doing a sharing our watershed school program for all Bellingham fifth graders. And it's a program that teaches the kids about watersheds, water and wastewater treatment, water conservation, stormwater infiltration and pollution, and water quality stewardship. In addition to that, is kind of a general program. In recent years, the city has also sponsored bus ads promoting the AIS program, a Scoop the Poop campaign, and a Wash Right program about the water quality impacts of power washing your driveways and sidewalks. Whatcom County has also done some outreach to homeowners association through our NPDES program to teach people how to maintain their privately owned stormwater systems. And of course, we take advantage of regional campaigns. Many of you might have been hearing on the radio or in the newspapers about the Don't Drip and Drive campaign that the state is doing to get people to get their cars fixed, to fix oil leaks and antifreeze leaks and stuff like that. This here is the out of the 2016 annual report, and it shows all of the program areas and the staff, capital costs, and other costs. So the 10 program areas. And I wanted to point this out because this has been brought up in the past. If you look at this and you look at section 9 here, it's education and engagement, you see, wow, $12,000. Well, that's a little bit of money, but compared to these other areas, it's not that much. And I just wanted to point out that when you look at the report, you got to keep in mind of the things that I just mentioned, that outreach and education education and engagement is really embedded into a lot of these other programs. So that $12,000 more along the lines of reflects kind of these very general campaigns that are easy to pull out and quantify. We have lots of outreach and education interspersed throughout other program areas. Another thing that I want to point out in the education and engagement arrangement area is the Washington State Lake Protection Association. Bellingham was fortunate enough to host their annual statewide conference this year in October. It was a 3-day conference, and one day was focused entirely on Lake Whatcom. And we had reports, presentations on the TMDL, the AIS program, drinking water treatment, and the Institute for Watershed Studies at Western Washington University did a presentation on water quality there, and it also included a field trip where we got to look at the capital facilities, the AIS program, and some of the land acquisitions that have been done. And it was a great opportunity for everybody in the rest of the state to see all the things that we're doing in Lake Whatcom, and also vice versa, a great opportunity for our local staff to see what's going on in other lakes throughout the state. What's going on in 2017 do we have planned? Well, both the city and the county have increased their outreach and education staff capacity, and through that we've actually just recently re-engaged our Lake Whatcom Management Program education team. It's a group that kind of has been dormant for the last 5 years as we focused on these more program-specific elements, but just a few weeks ago that group engaged and had its first meeting again, and we want to use that as an opportunity to kind of develop a holistic outreach and education program that kind of ties all these programmatic elements together, and in particular focus on some of the activities that are outlined in the 5-year plan. In particular, we're working on doing a welcome to the watershed for new homeowners. We want to be able to send people that are new to the watershed a packet that shows them all about the things happening in the lake, what the state of the lake is. You can find out about participating in HIP, AIS, the capital programs, all those things, as well as we're going to conduct a baseline survey of folks in the basin to kind of get their sense of stewardship and what their stewardship behaviors are. So as we roll out these additional education and engagement programs, we can go back and do follow-up surveys to see, are we making a difference in the awareness of things happening in the lake. Again, as I said in the beginning, all the things we're doing today are included in the 2015-2019 work plan, and we just touched on the highlights of what's happened in 2016. If you want to find out more about any of the things we talked about or some of the other program areas we didn't mention, go ahead and take a look at the 2016 annual report. All of these resources are available on the Lake Whatcom program website, as well as all the old reports and a whole bunch of information. And I believe with that, we've kind of answered questions along the way, but if anybody has questions about the stuff I presented or anything that we presented so far.
Thank you, Gary.
Be a good time to do it.
Commissioners, council members, Roxanne.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. So as we go through all these changes in social norms, scientific understanding, programs and services, technology improvements, land acquisition, and through our continued governmental commitments, I personally have very high hopes that we will address so many of these lake issues well before I'm 91 years of age. And I also just really sincerely want to thank all of the communities that we serve for allowing us to do this good work. Haishka Siyam.
Thank you. Any other questions from council members or commissioners? Okay, so actually there should be a sign-up sheet. Has anybody signed up to give public comment? Nancy Alianak. Alianak, thank you.
Okay. There was a Lake Whatcom water quality talk given to Bellingham City Council in 2015, and it starts very much like the one today did, with Lake Whatcom is comprised of 2 small shallow basins and 1 large deep basin. Each shallow basin is only about 20 meters or 60 feet deep and contains about 2% of the total water in the lake. Basin 3 is over 100 meters or 300 feet deep and contains about 96% of the total water in the lake. And a few pages later in that presentation, we learn basins 1 and 2 have a different oxygen profiles than basin 3, which is another way of saying basins 1 and 2 are impaired and Basin 3 is not. That's science. Unfortunately, the basin science is being erased from public view. Basin information like that has been scrubbed from the Lake Whatcom Management Program website. There are no basin descriptions in the Lake Facts tab, and no basins are in the 5-year work plan either. Reading those, anyone would think that the entire lake is impaired, not just 2 small basins adjacent to the city of Bellingham. The TMDL calculation for Lake Whatcom doesn't do basins either. The calculation used a surface area and a volume to describe Lake Whatcom. The lake has no shape in that calculation and no shallow basins. And the important point of that is it overestimates the amount of phosphorus you need to remove. So that's not science, but it is politics. However, the 2 small basins reappear when it is time to distribute money. The new HIP 2 targets watershed properties in Basin 1 and 2 with lakeshore, creekside frontage, and large lawns. At $1 per square foot, property improvement subsidies, targeted homeowners can receive up to $250,000. And that's based on the maximum possible project size and $1 per square foot. And I understand from this presentation it's now
we have a
$1.30.
3-minute public comment limit. If you could wrap up your comments.
Okay. Basin 3 homeowners in the same situation are out of luck. Money is focused on the 2 small Bellingham area basins. The TMDL treats all basins alike, yet the HIP 2 targets the 2 small shallow basins and ignores the 1 large deep basin. The program design itself is an acknowledgement that the Basin 1 and 2 phosphorus load is why Lake Whatcom is on the impaired list and where it can be remedied.
Thank you, Nancy.
Can we see more science and less politics in the future? Thank you.
Next, I have signed up Larry Brown.
Hi, my name is Larry Brown. I've met many of you guys, worked with a lot of you guys on the Lake Whatcom Policy Committee. This year, I returned to the sometimes thankless job of President of the Board of Directors of Sudden Valley, the Homeowners Association. In terms of private property around the lake, Sudden Valley is the biggest chunk. And I just want to assure you that we have been spending money on saving the lake for decades. We started requiring homeowners to manage rainwater runoff in the early 80s. Our minimum coverage is 50% per lot green space, and we have tons of parks and other green space. Now, like most governments, we are very poor in cash. We do, however, have some property, and we look forward with a great deal of enthusiasm to continue working with all of you guys to come up with ways that we can leverage some of our property to help you accomplish what you want and maybe get some things done that we need to have done. For instance, we have a dog park. A lot of people walk their dogs. They're pretty darn good about picking up after their dogs. The geese, however, don't have anybody to clean up after them. That is really an artificial park, and it is sinking back into the lake. And so we're going to need to work with staff. We look forward to it on some way to help improve water quality off of that. But we're on Basin 3. That is, quote unquote, the clean lake. I was very alarmed to hear there is some degradation going on. I don't know whether that's because of the temperature of the lake or the large ocean liner that is just being difficult to turn around. Nonetheless, we would like to see better data of comparing Austin Creek, our creek, with Smith Creek, because the last data that we had, unfortunately several years old already, says that they're identical in terms of runoff, developed versus undeveloped. So we thought we were doing pretty good. Now it turns out maybe not so much. We're not shirking from that. We do spend every year budget money, difficult to come by because our budget is even more difficult to pass than your guys, on saving the lake. And we would love to continue doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? We are over time, but sure. Sir, if you go ahead and state your name. And you can.
My name is Jeff Margolis, and I live out in Van Zandt. And I served on the Lake Whatcom Watershed Advisory Committee in the early 80s, and I used to complain about politics to my dad. He said, well, Rome wasn't built in a day, and I understand now. Back then, in the early 80s, the focus of the Watershed Committee seemed to be medical. You know, you had this loading in the lake, which commanded water purification, water treatment, and chlorination. And at that time, the health department was represented on that committee, Dr. Jones, and the big word was trihalomethanes and cancer. And I just don't have the feeling that that comes into focus today. And so I don't even know if there's someone from the health department here today. So I submit that for your consideration. The incentives are when the state health department and the county health department come to my business. Yow! You know, it's going to be done tomorrow. And, you know, so as to, in a sense, the universalization of cost, you know, voluntary and non-regulatory methods of getting things done are really nice and diplomatic and friendly, but not too quick. And so we're still waiting for something to happen. The question was asked about measurement of phosphorus. And is this a theoretical measurement, or is the stuff actually measured? And, or do you figure that that's what it should amount to? And so I don't know. So, you know, will the day come? Is there going to be soil test police or something? I don't know how you're going to come to grips with this, but we're not getting there, and you will be 91, and so what is the case on water treatment? The whole idea of addressing this in the 80s was to do something about water treatment. Now, is it costing you more to treat the water today, or what's happening in terms of water treatment? And are you using more chlorine? And what's unfolding? So I think take a step back and go to the more fundamental issues, I think. So, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, thank you, everyone. I think this has been a very good meeting. Some people have been coming to these meetings much longer than I have, and I think there's a recognition the tones of the meeting is changing. We have more to point to. We have stopped talking about what we need to do, and we've started doing it. I would say that we need, this is a very large project, needs to be addressed at all levels, both the large projects and the parcel by parcel, through education, through land preservation, and through direct efforts to try to remove the unnatural levels of phosphorus entering the lake. I'm going to go ahead and, if there's no objection, I'm going to adjourn the City Council's portion of this meeting. Any objection? Okay, City Council is adjourned.
If no objection, I will adjourn the Lake Whatcom Water and Sewer District portion of this meeting.
County Council is adjourned for everyone except for Barbara Brenner.
Thank you. Good night.